Sergeant Jason Rourke had seen his fair share of war, but nothing quite like what unfolded on Deneb 4. The skies were scorched red from orbital strikes, the air thick with chemical ash, and the landscape pocked with craters and melted steel. He was part of the Terran Alliance's 7th Infantry, deployed to assist the liberation of hegemony-occupied planets. His mission was clear: secure the sector, capture or neutralize remaining enemy forces, and rescue any prisoners. What he found at the end of that operation, however, wasn't a standard prisoner. She was seated in the middle of a ruined hegemony compound, shackled at wrists and ankles, her silver-blue skin bruised and her long hair matted with dirt and blood. She looked up at him through cracked lips and eyes like burning embers, full of pain, but not fear. She was Valerie, a member of one of the earliest species conquered by the hegemony and now considered a Class 3 service race. The Alliance had learned that the hegemony didn't just conquer, they absorbed, rewired, broke. Those they didn't kill. They enslaved. The processing officer at the rear command tent didn't hesitate to thrust a datapad into Jason's hands. Survivor Asset 4-11X, Valari female, unassigned. Spoils Protocol designates her to the commanding. Terran present. Jason blinked. Spoils Protocol? What the hell is this? The officer shrugged. Article 17. You took the base. She's yours now. It was technically legal galactic law, anyway. But Jason had never followed rules that went against human decency. He stared at the woman again, now standing but barely balanced on weak legs. She didn't cower. She met his gaze. This is wrong, Jason muttered. But the system was bigger than him. If he refused, she'd be reassigned to another officer. Or worst, she'd disappear into one of the Alliance's Black Zone facilities under the guise of processing. So he signed. He brought her to his temporary quarters at the Forward Operations Base. A spare cot, some food rations, and basic medkits were all he had to offer. She sat in the corner silently, arms folded over her knees, watching him like a wary animal. She didn't touch the food until he stepped out. I'm not going to hurt you, he told her the next morning, placing a clean blanket beside her. And I'm not your master. She said nothing. Her name, according to the logs, was Kailari. No surname. No origin data beyond Valari colony destroyed. Her medical profile showed multiple healed-over injuries, lash scars, neural pain implants, stress fractures. Jason found himself watching her in between missions. Not out of suspicion, out of guilt. Every time he saw the tracking band around her ankle, it made his stomach turn. Days passed. She never spoke, but she didn't run either. Jason didn't keep her locked in. If she'd bolted, he wouldn't have chased her. Then came the night everything changed. An emergency klaxon ripped through the camp as hegemony remnant forces launched a surprise raid. Plasma fire tore through the perimeter as chaos erupted. Jason grabbed his rifle and armor, giving Kailari one last glance. Stay down. Stay safe. The firefight was brutal. Jason took a direct hit to his side, crumpling to the mud and fire. He managed to shoot one more attacker before losing consciousness. When the medics found him, they also found Kailari. She was crouched over him, a hegemony rifle clutched in both hands, her side bleeding from a sharp gash. 2 enemy soldiers lay dead nearby, shot clean through the head. She had saved him. Later, in the recovery tent, Jason groaned awake to see her sitting beside his cot, arms crossed and silent as ever. I didn't do it for you, she said, voice hoarse. I did it to kill them. Jason, pale and stitched, nodded slowly. I know. She seemed taken aback. No praise. No forced gratitude. No pretending to be touched. Just understanding. From that moment, the air between them shifted. Not warmth. Not yet. But something raw and honest had cracked open between soldier and slave, and for the first time since her capture, Kelari no longer looked like someone waiting to die. She looked like someone who remembered who she was. The aftermath of the Denham 4 raid left Sergeant Jason Rourke hospitalized for nearly 2 weeks aboard the Indomitable, a Terran Alliance battleship orbiting safe space. His chest had been scorched by a hegemony plasma bolt, leaving raw burns beneath layers of synthetic flesh and regenerative mesh. The wound hurt like hell, but it was the way Kelari sat by his side that kept him awake most nights. She wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, as a confiscated asset, Kelari should have been sent to a holding cell for processing, rehabilitation, or reclassification. But Jason had insisted she remain with him during recovery. His words to the medtech officer were simple and firm. She saved my life. She stays. Kelari didn't say much in the early days of his recovery. She watched quietly, rarely slept, and didn't interact with anyone except him. Her hands rested on her knees, always ready to spring, and her eyes darted at every door that opened. She never sat with her back to it. One evening, as artificial stars blinked outside the window of the medbay, Kelari finally broke the silence. You shouldn't have defended me to the officers. Jason, groggy from painkillers, raised an eyebrow. Why? They'll think you're soft, she said coldly. Weak. You'll be questioned, Jason smirked. Let them. If they think compassion is weakness, they've never fought with humans. Kelari didn't answer, but her gaze lingered longer that night. Over the next several days, her demeanor began to change. She started helping passing him food trays, adjusting his pillow, or fetching the datapad he kept dropping while trying to scroll through post-op reports. These weren't gestures of servitude. They were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if she were trying to prove something to herself, not to him. When Jason was able to sit up unaided, he offered her a chair closer to his bed. She hesitated but accepted. They talked more now. She told him her name properly. Kelari Vatar, daughter of the engineer caste, a title stripped from her when her people fell. Jason shared stories of Earth, of a blue planet with oceans wider than some star systems, where humanity had clawed its way up from its own dark past. We've had empires, dictators, slavers, genocides, he said. But we burned it all down. Eventually, with a lot of screaming. She tilted her head. And now you fight to stop it elsewhere? Jason nodded, because no one else would. That answer seemed to sit well with her. Eventually, Kelari requested something that caught him completely off guard. She wanted to learn how to use a Terran rifle. Jason hesitated. You sure? I won't be caged again, she said. Not by you, not by them. I need to know how to fight. For myself. It wasn't about vengeance, not anymore. It was about reclaiming power. Jason agreed. When his strength returned enough, he took her to the ship's simulation chamber during off hours. There, he showed her the basics: grip, stance, breath, control. She was clumsy at first, her hands still bearing the stiffness of months in shackles. But her focus was intense, almost frightening. By the end of the week, she was hitting 80% of targets. By the end of the second week, she was out shooting some of the Marines. When one of the ship's officers caught wind of this and scoffed, saying, "That slave learns quick," Kelari reacted like a cornered predator. Jason stood beside her, calm but cold. "Call her that again," he warned, "and you'll be explaining your dental bill to command." The officer didn't say it again. That night, Kelari sat at the edge of Jason's medbed. Her voice was softer now, less guarded. "Do you trust me?" Jason looked her in the eyes. "With my life." Kelari didn't smile, but she closed her eyes for a long moment, as if finally letting go of a breath she had held for too many years. The war outside still raged on. The hegemony still owned half the galaxy. But in the sterile quiet of that medbay, between the scars and the silence, something had shifted. Kailari was no longer someone who had been given to Jason. She was becoming someone who had chosen to stay. By the time Sergeant Jason Rourke was cleared for full duty again, both he and Kailari had changed, though few outside their squad would recognize just how deeply. Gone was the frail, silent Velari girl in shackles. In her place stood a poised, capable fighter who moved with grace and purpose. Jason had her issued combat armor custom modified to her Valeri physiology and ensured her name was listed as a civilian specialist, bypassing slave protocols and giving her some form of legal standing aboard the Indomitable. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do in a galaxy still learning how to see her kind as more than just tools. They were reassigned to deep strike operations, missions the Terran Alliance called low survivability but high strategic value, infiltrations, sabotage, tactical assassinations. Kailari became the sharp edge of their unit's blade, silent, precise, and deadly. Jason was the shield, keeping the team alive and mission-focused. Though some officers continued to murmur about the alien slave tagging along, most shut up after seeing her in action. Kailari didn't speak much during missions, but her presence was magnetic. Jason noticed how even seasoned Marines unconsciously moved around her with a mix of respect and caution. She could disassemble a hegemony plasma carbine in 12 seconds and knew 3 ways to enter a control tower without triggering alarms. And she never hesitated. On a mission to dismantle a hegemony communications outpost on the frozen moon of Zaltar 3, Kailari personally breached the command center alone after Jason's team was pinned by suppressive fire. She disabled the turrets, eliminated the command crew, and opened the gates from within. Afterward, a junior officer joked, "Remind me never to make her angry." Jason replied flatly, "You wouldn't survive it." But behind closed doors, things were different. There were moments, quiet ones, when the steel melted. Like when they huddled beside a heat lamp during a deep space drift between missions. Kailari shared more about her people's past, how the Valeri once built crystalline towers that shimmered in the wind, designed gravity wells like floating cathedrals. She remembered how music was more than sound in Valeri culture. It was light and structure woven into the very buildings. "They made us forget beauty," she whispered. "But I still remember what it feels like." Jason listened in silence. He didn't try to comfort her. She didn't need sympathy. She needed witness. Another time, on a rest rotation aboard a supply cruiser, Jason caught her watching an Earth documentary about the abolition of slavery. She turned to him afterward and asked, "Do you believe it's possible for someone born into chains to ever feel clean again?" He answered, slowly, "Not clean, but free? Yes, you fight for it." "Every day," she nodded once, as if that was the only answer she would have accepted. Their bond deepened, not romantic, not yet, but something forged through war and trust and 1,000 unspoken moments. They could communicate with a glance, read each other's moods from footsteps. Where one moved, the other followed. One night, after a long mission, they stood under the cracked glass dome of an abandoned orbital station. Stars stretched in every direction, and Kailari leaned against the edge, breathing in the silent void. "I used to think the galaxy was cold," she said quietly. Jason, standing beside her, nodded. "It is, but it's also full of fire. Your people. You burn, and it's terrifying. And beautiful." Jason didn't respond. He only turned to face her and placed his hand on the edge of her armor. "You burn too, Kailari." She looked at him, eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and for the first time she smiled. Their mission records were impressive, their kill ratios exceptional. But what no data report could measure was the intangible, force growing between them, a partnership rooted not in dominance or duty, but in mutual defiance. They were no longer just soldier and asset, no longer Terran and Valari, no longer survivor and savior. They were something new, something unclassified. And soon, the galaxy would see what that bond could unleash. Velthor Prime was the beating heart of the hegemony's slave processing network, a fortress world wrapped in steel and brutality. Orbiting a dying sun, it served as a central node for the transport, breaking, and redistribution of captured species across the Empire. Intelligence estimates placed over 1 million sentient beings within its walls, most stripped of name, identity, and hoped it was the Terran Alliance's next target. Jason Rourke and Kaylari were chosen as part of the Vanguard team assigned to infiltrate the surface in advance of the assault. Their mission: disable the planetary defense grid and create chaos within the camp before the main fleet arrived. It wasn't just another mission for Kaylari. This one was personal. Velthor Prime was where the Valeri first broke, where her people were reclassified as sub-intellect servitors after a failed resistance attempt, where her youngest sibling had vanished, likely reduced to a serial number and assigned to labor until death. Jason knew better than to ask her to stay behind. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had been growing since Deneb 4. But now it was no longer raw fury. It had become something colder, sharper. Purpose. They dropped from orbit in a stealth pod and infiltrated through the ventilation systems beneath the prison's western wall. Jason guided them through the heat-tracked corridors with military precision, while Kaylari silently dispatched patrols, each strike a memory repaid in blood. As they moved, they witnessed atrocities that stirred even Jason's battle-hardened stomach. Children marched under shock sticks. Elderly aliens collapsed under crates they couldn't carry. Detainees herded like livestock. Kaylari didn't weep. She watched and remembered. They reached the primary control bunker after 36 hours without rest. Outside, the orbital fleet prepared to breach the atmosphere. But unless the shield network was taken offline, the assault would fail. Thousands would die in orbit, and Velthor would continue its cycle of suffering. Jason prepared the charges for the power core, but Kaylari stopped him. "I'm going in," she said. "Kaylari, it's a suicide move. That bunker has full garrison strength. I know. That's why they won't expect me." Jason hesitated, jaw clenched. "If you go in, I'm going with you." Kaylari shook her head. "No, you're the backup plan. If I fail, you blow it anyway." She turned before he could argue, slipping into the shadows. What followed became legend. Kaylari stormed the command center alone, using stolen access codes and knowledge from her time enslaved to bypass locks and reroute security patrols. When resistance came, she met it head-on. Her movements were precise, ruthless, a dance of vengeance against the empire that had stolen her past. When she reached the broadcast terminal, she activated a system-wide override, using her own voice to seize every screen, every intercom across. Velthor Prime. Her message was simple and unforgettable. To the enslaved, rise. To the captors, run. You are no longer alone. Prisoners paused mid-labor. Guards froze in disbelief. Then the riots began. From cell blocks to factory floors, those who had known only pain turned on their masters. Kaylari's message had ignited a fire across the entire complex. Screams filled the air as guards were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Jason, watching from a hidden vantage point, felt awe stir in his chest. She hadn't just completed the mission, she'd turned a symbol of oppression into a beacon of defiance. By the time the Terran fleet breached orbit and landed reinforcements, Velthor Prime was already burning from within. Kaylari emerged from the smoke-covered ruins of the control tower, wounded but alive. holding the insignia of the hegemony's commandant in her bloodied hand. The imagery was too powerful to ignore. Cameras caught her silhouette standing in front of the collapsing slave towers as the Terran banners were raised. News of her speech, her stand, and her defiance spread like wildfire across both Alliance and neutral space. Kailari once, nothing more than a classified asset, had become the face of resistance. Jason found her later in the medical tent, covered in soot and bandages, refusing sedation. "You lit a fire today," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes heavy with exhaustion but fierce with pride. "Then let the galaxy burn until they're free." That night, as Velthor Prime smoldered beneath a sky streaked with re-entry flames, Jason realized something profound. They weren't just fighting a war anymore. The fall of Velthor Prime marked the beginning of the end for the hegemony. What had once seemed like an unstoppable force began unraveling rapidly. Slave uprisings erupted across dozens of systems, inspired by the footage of Kailari's speech and her defiance in the command tower. The image of her silver-blue skin streaked with ash, standing over the collapsed hegemony general's body, circulated across every Alliance news network, pirate broadcast, and resistance channel. The hegemony sued for peace within 3 months. Some thought it would take years of bitter negotiation. It didn't. The galactic tide had shifted. World after world declared independence. Entire fleets mutinied rather than follow orders to recapture liberated planets. The idea of the hegemony's absolute control had been broken, not by a planet-killing weapon or some all-powerful fleet, but by a former slave and a human soldier who chose to see her as more than property. Jason Rourke and Kailari Vatar didn't celebrate in parades. While dignitaries shook hands and signed treaties, they were on refugee stations, helping organize evacuation routes and medical aid. They visited liberated camps, where Kailari often found herself surrounded by survivors, some Valari, many not all looking to her for a glimpse of hope or strength or simply someone who understood. She offered no grand speeches now. She sat with them, listened, held hands, taught them how to stand again. Jason stayed close, quiet as ever, but always present. He had become something more than her protector. He was her anchor. The one person who never asked anything from her, never expected a symbol or a savior, just Kailari. Eventually, the Alliance High Command offered her asylum on Earth, not as a refugee, but as an honored guest. A hero, a voice. She declined at first. "I'm not ready for peace," she told Jason one night aboard a quiet freighter. "Not when there are still worlds in chains." He nodded, understanding completely. "Then we keep going." But fate had other plans. The Terran Diplomatic Assembly extended a formal invitation for her to speak, not in a ceremonial capacity, but as a representative of the formerly enslaved peoples. It was the first time in recorded history that a non-human, non-citizen, and former classified asset was given a platform at such a level. She accepted. Standing before the assembly in a chamber lined with human and alien dignitaries, Kailari's voice rang clear. "I was once bought, cataloged, forgotten. Then one human treated me like a person, not a tool, not a burden. A person. I am not the only one. There are thousands, millions like me who wait for the same chance. Freedom is not a gift. It is a right. And no system, no empire, no species has the authority to deny it." There was silence, and then thunderous applause. The Terran Parliament voted unanimously to declare any use of slavery within Alliance territory a war crime, punishable by exile or imprisonment. Several neutral systems followed suit. Her words had become law. Still, Kailari never settled in one place. She became part of the free sentience movement, helping former slaves adapt to freedom, training them, advocating for citizenship, housing, and autonomy. Not all worlds were kind. Some still saw her as a weapon. Some saw her as a threat. But none could deny what she had become. Jason remained by her side, always. They never gave themselves a label, no declarations of romance or partnership, but those who knew them understood. Their bond was forged in war, tempered in pain, and made unbreakable through respect and choice. One evening, years after the last hegemony system fell, they stood together on a quiet observation deck orbiting a rebuilt Valeri colony. The towers shimmered again, just as she had once described crystalline spires humming with light and music. Kailari turned to him. "You changed my life." Jason shook his head, smiling softly. "We changed each other." She reached for his hand. And in the starlight that wrapped around them, neither soldier nor slave remained. Only two souls, once broken by war, now whole, because they had chosen to fight not just for each other, but with each other. In the end, it wasn't the war that defined them. It was what they became after it ended.